2024 has been a crazy year in the SBA industry. I know we've been saying that for 5 years in a row. 2020 was COVID and PPP. 2021 was the free money era and all those SBA incentives. Then the rates shot up in 2022, sending shockwaves down Main Street. 2023 ushered in sweeping changes, and now the industry is going haywire in 2024. We've seen shop after shop shut down, LinkedIn job updates every time you hit refresh. I mean, I'm even unemployed right now, but that's a story for another day. Then you have retirements, including our guest today, who decided to officially announce his retirement on our podcast. And since he was on his way out, he felt free to tell us how he really feels about the recent SBA changes. He openly discusses BDO compensation, which, is taboo. And we brought back the draft. And that should give you a hint as to who this guest is. So without further ado, let's get on with the show. It's no secret that most entrepreneurs are busy, and getting them to focus on their underwriting checklist is a full-time job. So when it comes to the business plan, projections, and assumptions, I'm a huge proponent of bringing in an expert. Rapid Business Plans is a trusted partner to small business lenders and their borrowers. They make it easy for entrepreneurs to tell their story in a format bankers love. Their team goes the extra mile to ensure everything is done fast and done right. And they're all based here in the US with employees across 4 different time zones. They just completed an export business plan for one of my borrowers, and they were super happy. We got their CRE expansion loan approved, and now they can move forward in their business with a clear plan. Rapid also offers feasibility studies, which I highly recommend for any independent startup loan. So go to rapidbusinessplans.com for more information and set up your Get Acquainted call today. I'll leave a link in the show notes below. Is this like my first 3 Timers Club episode? Like, I interviewed you. This is our 3rd time on the pod?
Yes, sir.
That's
so proud
wow.
Recipient of the first interview, proud recipient of the 2-time interview first.
The
and
first
now
recurring
this will
guest.
Yes, first recurring guest. And this will be the first 3-time guest on the Art of SBA Lending podcast. So thank you for having me on, Ray.
Well, it's a pleasure, because earlier today I was interviewing, because we had talked last time. You had interviewed a congressperson on your podcast, and we had brought that up. I interviewed the former acting administrator of the SBA this morning.
Oh wow, that's amazing.
David's mom.
Hey, I was gonna say I don't want to take too much credit, but I really have loved the evolution of the podcast over the past 3 years, from the height of COVID, when you started this in your garage, to the full background. I think you have 3 other podcasts going now and a whole podcasting company. I know I saw one with Sterling and Alan and those guys. And then you have like a daily show. That's amazing, man. And I really, hats off to you. I think what you're doing, putting yourself out there, is extremely, extremely difficult, hard, and still producing $30-40 million in SBA loans a year, and being able to do all of these things and advancing the cause of getting people access to capital who otherwise would not have that access to capital through the SBA is amazing. And I really, really admire your mission, man.
Well, thank you for saying that. And, you were pretty early in the podcast game as well. And I know you've been putting out some episodes here and there, and I know you're about to ramp up again. What's that been like for you doing the podcast?
It's been a journey, because we had a theme and a topic that we were discussing, interviewing what I call new American entrepreneurs. And just with my workload, having a 3rd child last year, and a lot of that, our goal was to try to do 2 episodes a month. We are probably still at the rate of 1 episode a month. And so I think this year the goal is going to be to try to get to 2 episodes a month. And we're going to talk about something more near and dear to me as well on the pod around commercial real estate, residential real estate, and real estate development, which is why.
Well, hold on, pause it.
Okay.
Let me get there. I'm gonna get there right now.
Okay.
But before I do want to acknowledge that when you came on this last podcast, you immediately started firing shots. I don't know if you remember this. I don't even remember what you said, but you were firing shots towards Alan, I feel like. Do you remember?
Was that? I think it was all.
You're just coming in hot. Well, it was. We're all friends. But by the way, you also told us, because you went to the Beo Retreat. You went to the first two, right?
Yeah.
Or the first. Okay. Yeah, and we took your advice. We moved it. You said switch the city, Miami. We did Miami, but you didn't come.
It was my kid's birthday. There's no way I could have come. And with me coming out of SBA, I think next year my plan is to be one of the sponsors for the retreat.
Okay, so here you just hinted at it, but I know you're here to make an announcement. Go ahead and officially make your announcement. This is going to be the first time many people are hearing this, even people that might be working at the same, institution that you're at right now. So let her rip. Greg, what's going on?
So I kind of want to start by saying I've made numerous life changes in my life and evolutions of who I am as a person. At 31 years old, just 9 years ago, I chose to get into SBA lending as a broker and then consequentially as a banker because I was in the family business as an entrepreneur. And I really felt that in that industry, in the gas station, C-store industry, I wasn't working to my fullest potential. And I had also at that time in 2014 seen the first Teslas coming off the lot. And I really felt the gas station C-store industry within 20 to 30 years was going to go away. So at 31 years old, I took a complete 180 and moved into banking and finance, which was my background. And initially, I had looked at investment banking and other opportunities and realized I wanted to help people like myself and my community because I had done an SBA loan personally. So I chose to get into SBA lending. And these past 9 years has been amazing. I've learned so much from how to underwrite a loan, to process a loan, to selling a loan, closing a loan, and servicing a SBA 7A loan. I have done SBA 504 loans, USDA loans, and kind of come full circle back to entrepreneurship. So, without any further ado, I would like to announce my retirement from SBA lending and banking in the very near future. So, you may ask, why is it that I am retiring from SBA lending?
That is my next question.
Well,
that is my, no, go ahead. That's yeah. Why did you decide to do this and leave SBA?
So we have currently a wonderful opportunity to do multiple real estate development projects here in the Research Triangle of North Carolina. And if any of you know the migration trends since COVID, Florida, where Ray is, has added over 1 million people since 2020. Texas is second with about a little over 800,000. But a little known fact is the number 3 state that has added the most number of people is the state of North Carolina at 480,000 since COVID. With the tremendous growth here, with the announcement of the Apple East Coast headquarters and Apple being the largest company in the world today, we believe that we are poised for growth that is rarely seen in the United States for a metro area, right? You've seen it in Austin, I would say Denver, to a lesser extent, Nashville, and then the growth we've seen in Orlando, Tampa, Jacksonville in the Florida markets. And those markets are amazing. South Florida obviously has grown, but the markets as a percentage that have grown the most are in Florida: Jacksonville, Tampa, Orlando, Austin in Texas. And similarly, you've seen that growth in the Raleigh, Durham, and Charlotte markets. What I realized as we move to this next step in our journey, there is a ton of opportunity to build housing for all of those new migrants from other states and internationally that are coming to the United States. We all know we have a housing population deficit of about 7 million homes in this country. And we have legal immigration adds about 1 million people to the US every day. I don't want to get into the politics of how many illegal immigrants come across the southern border. You guys can make your own decisions, but we know that number is not zero. So all of those people need housing. And as more and more people move to the Southeast, we want to provide them with adequate housing. And I think at least my vision is for the next decade and the next step in my journey, we're going to focus on getting housing to all of these migrants coming from California, New York, and internationally to the great state of North Carolina, and especially the Research Triangle, Raleigh-Durham market.
Wow. So that's quite a left turn. Very interesting. So you're going to you're developing townhomes, basically.
Yes. We have multiple projects now. Our first project breaks ground in April of 2024, which is a couple months away. We have a condo project. We have single family home subdivisions, townhome subdivisions, and mixed use buildings as well. But our focus is mainly on residential housing, and I am a huge proponent of home ownership. So if you look at housing costs in Texas compared to Florida, the reason why housing in Texas is still cheaper, because even with the high growth, the laws in Florida make it a lot harder in terms of zoning and arable land to build more housing. And that's why a $500,000 home in Texas is probably twice the size as a $500,000 home in Fort Lauderdale, right?
Well, congratulations, first of all, on making this decision. It must have been I would think, like, is this a difficult decision that you had to make over the course of, weeks and months of kind of thinking about it? Or
no, yeah. It's 100% very difficult decision to make. My wife's still not comfortable with the decision, because you get used to the paycheck, and depending on what you guys, the viewers, have that are BDOs, comp plans. Our comp plan currently is probably in the top 10% of all comp plans in the country. You can make easily, 3, 4, 5, 600,000 a year as an SBA BDO. And to give up that type of salary, that type of commission structure and cushion is something that is extremely difficult. I'm going into the unknown, but for me, it's really going back to my roots as an entrepreneur. For the decade prior to me being an SBA lender. I was an entrepreneur. I built a company when I came out of college that originally was doing $2 million in revenue and had less than 10 employees, to a company doing well over 20 million in revenue with over 100 employees.
Other than the paycheck, was there anything else that made this decision hard for you?
Also losing the ability to help borrowers, giving them that access to capital. There is that lifeline that you give a lot of first generation immigrants. And, a lot of my borrowers are geared towards that because, like I've said on your pod previously, no one gave my father that opportunity in the 90s and early 2000s because his English wasn't the greatest and he didn't know how to go and get a loan in the United States. So he called all of his buddies and borrowed money to grow his company. And that could only take him so far.
Right. Guys, the reviews are in. SBA lenders are calling CorpSmart the best due diligence firm in the industry. CorpSmart is a one-stop shop for all your due diligence needs. And in SBA lending, there's a lot. Searches, filings, vehicles, you name it. I remember I brought a deal in one time that involved an airplane. My credit guy said, "How are we going to go about perfecting a lien on an airplane?" I said, "I don't know. Call CorpSmart." They have decades of experience and they're all about service. And I could speak firsthand on that. If you're not already outsourcing your due diligence, one, you're probably wasting a lot of precious hours that you could be using to make more loans. And two, you could make a mistake, especially if you're lending across state lines because every state is different. If you're looking to streamline this year and get more efficient, this is an easy layup. They can even plug into your LOS so that you can order your searches with a click of a button, and then they're going to end up right where you need them to. To discuss your due diligence needs, go to the CorpSmart website at corp-smart.com, and you can let them know I sent you. Did the changes that the SBA made this past year have anything to do with it? Like, what's your take on all those changes they made? Because it was like a big year for SBA.
In terms of what the SBA has done for changes, I do like the fact that any loans under $1 million, they've gotten rid of the guarantee. Their focus has been on pushing small loans. The credit scoring system for loans under $500,000, and that process has been great. A lot of banks, especially larger banks, your Wells, Chases of the world, Truist, they have been doing these types of loans and not putting an SBA stamp on them. I think this really helps that guy who is starting a food truck or starting a DJ business, something small, right? Where we don't have the time to do a $100,000 loan, $75,000 loan, $150,000, $300,000, whatever it is. It gives more access to capital. I think those changes made by the SBA were a good thing. I looked at some of the partner buyout clauses where now you can have a partial partner buyout. That, I guarantee you, was put in by private equity lobbyists. So there are a bunch of smaller. So when you hear about private equity, you hear about these trillion-dollar, multi-$100 billion private equity firms. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of smaller private equity firms that have pulled together $50 million, $40 million, and they're going out acquiring businesses. A lot of them use SBA loans. So more and more, as I've become a lender, I've seen private equity coming in with their private equity model, coming in and purchasing these small businesses. I think this is a lot to do with the Cody Sanchez effect that you've seen her all over TikTok about boring businesses. So you're seeing a lot of that today. And that's why I think the partial buyout rule was instituted. I think it was lobbying by the private equity lobby to put that in, because that's how 90% of private equity deals work.
Yeah, because it came out of nowhere. I don't remember anyone saying, "Hey, SBA, we want to do partial change," like from within the industry. Like no one was saying that. We were saying other things like, "Hey, let's get rid of this silly rule," or, "Why do we need, all of this?" But yeah, that one came out of nowhere. So did the PLP, right? That, hey, we now need to pull PLPs differently, and the SBA is kind of slowing us down there, and even just not giving certain approvals for certain of these error codes. That I know was born out of PPP and the fraud.
Correct.
And they want to bring that over here. So,
and I think it's misguided in the sense because PPP was kind of a free for all, and you're going to have fraud when you do something so massive and on such a massive scale. The 7A program has very minimal fraud. I mean, I don't know what the percentages are.
I haven't heard of any.
But I think it's less than 0.1%.
The amount of due diligence we're doing, I mean, you really have to. Sometimes I hear of it in like a USDA loan or something, like, you watch Coleman or whatever, and you see some fraud here and there, every 6 months maybe, but to overhaul the entire SBA system and the approval process for that, I agree. It is misguided.
And we have to realize at the end of the day, it's a government agency that even though the head of the SBA is a non-governmental person, they are appointed. And they are given a mission based on who the president is, who the party in power is. Again, not to get too political, but that's what kind of drives the SBA. So, I mean, this rule could literally change next year. If we get a new president, that rule could change. So we never know.
And you won't have to worry about it.
Yeah. I wanted to kind of talk to you about one thing on how I got into SBA lending. So we had a conventional loan done at a bank locally here on 3 pieces of property that we own, 3 gas stations. And they ended up cross-collateralizing the loan, and the commercial banker at the time said, oh, this is standard. This is what we have to do. And don't worry about it. If you sell one of these properties, we're going to give you back a percentage of the money and pay a percentage of the loan down. I was like, okay, didn't think too much of it. 3 years go by, and we sold a piece of property way over ask. And the current loan outstanding was $2.7 million, cross-collateralized with 3 gas stations. We had $1 million sale for one of the 3 gas stations. And basically what the bank did was take all of the money and pay down the note to the point where we could not 1031 the money, and I had a $250,000 capital gains tax bill.
Oof. Ouch.
And so I'm sitting with a capital gains tax bill, and the bank ends up giving us a loan to pay for the taxes, right? And that's so silly. Yes. And my parents didn't understand it. And that was one of my main reasons, even as someone who graduated with a degree in business and finance, that I was so easily duped by these commercial lenders. And so that was one of the main reasons I got into SBA lending, to make sure that this doesn't happen to other borrowers. So whenever I, come across clients, I like to advise clients as if I'm the borrower and I want to help them out. I want to make sure that they're not getting cross-collateralized. These kind of problems aren't occurring. And that's one thing I love about the 7A program, is that it's very standard. We have rules, guidelines. Everything is very standard. And because of that, everybody can see black and white. And you know what you're getting into when you get an SBA 7A loan.
Oh, that other one was conventional.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Yeah. So, and that's some good advice, because the moral there for me is, don't trust the salesperson on your questions on a servicing action. not to say don't trust them, but like, if I get that question, I often will just, even if they're not a borrower yet, they're a prospect, I'll often just loop in my servicing team because they'll ask, like, what if I sell my house? What if I do this? Because whatever I say as an originator 3, 5, 7 years ago, I might not even be here, right? And what are you going to say? Well,
Right.
Ray told me this, and it's like, oh, well, Ray was wrong again. That's cool, man. Well, it sounds like you had a lot of, purpose in what you're doing, and that's kind of what drives you to do these things, right? You tie it to your story, and that's very cool. And, if you don't mind, I'd love to take a trip down memory lane these last 9 years and ask you some questions. Like, what was like a memorable experience you had in your SBA journey, as an SBA lender? Like, does any, thing, whether it was, a time, with certain people in your company or a borrower or a deal or anything jump out at you in terms of a memorable experience?
So I've got to tell you about the very first SBA loan I ever closed in 2015. It was a carpet company down the street from my house. I had known the owner of it because his son or daughter, I think, went to high school with me. And I just started as a loan broker, literally like a month prior. And they weren't able to get a conventional loan from their local bank, right? Wells Fargo, BB&T at that time. So they came to me, and I had gone to a broker event down in Myrtle Beach at the gas station show. And I had met multiple banks down there, gotten their information. And so I call this guy up. His name is Jim. He's not in the industry anymore, so I can say his name. And I was like, here's this loan. This is the process. And I was like, this is my first deal. Go ahead and walk me through the process, right? So we get through the process. He issues me a term sheet. We get a check-in and everything. And he's like, oh, it's in underwriting. And then he's like, oh, we've got it approved. We're moving it to closing and all of this stuff. And then for like weeks on time, he's just like really slow playing it. And we are about 4 months into this process. And I get a call from his boss at the time. And he's like, Jim is no longer working with us. Where are we on your loan? And I said, well, Jim said that the loan was approved and it was ready for closing. And he says, what loan are you talking about? We don't even have this in the pipeline. So this guy had never submitted the loan to underwriting.
I'm not even shocked, dude. Like, why am I not shocked? That's the problem. Like, that's crazy.
Isn't that crazy, though?
There's a lot of BDOs out there that are like, what are you doing? Like, there's a lot of good ones that we're friends with a lot of them. But some of them just don't get it. It's like, what? So crazy.
And so thanks to the lender who was the director of the department at the time, and he got the loan through underwriting, credit, and closing within 30 days.
Oh, awesome.
So we got the loan closed in the timeline that we needed to. And that's when I realized, so the funny thing is, that bank gets bought. And that person leaves to go to a new bank. And I literally, this is when LinkedIn had first come out. This is 2015. And so many of you guys, and I know one of your podcasters, my buddy Sterling, is great at sliding in the DMs. So I slid into the DMs, the LinkedIn DMs of my first boss. And I said, hey, I just noticed you got a new position as director of SBA Lending. Why don't I send you my resume and you check it out? We worked on this deal together when you were at this previous financial institution, and all I needed was the interview. And this is with zero banking experience. I've never worked at a bank, okay? Not as an underwriter, not as a teller, nothing. and I got my first job. And you know how they say, once a banker, always a banker. So that's kind of how it started. I slid
Wow.
into the DMs of my boss
There you go.
on LinkedIn. So that's what I always tell people. If you're young, you're an underwriter, you're a BDA, you are any of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Shoot your shot. You know, today there's so many recruiters out there. I probably have 5 to 6 recruiters DM me every day or every other day. So the market has kind of turned. And that's one thing about our job is if you're a good BDO, you have tons of job security. This is my thing to BDOs out there. If you're being mistreated by your manager, or if your credit box is shrinking and you feel like you have to stay there, there are a ton of other shops looking for BDOs, and SBA is the best kept secret in banking. A lot of people don't know this, but the only person that makes more than us as a lender are investment bankers that get to the director level. I mean, if you're a junior analyst, first year, second year, third year analyst, or until you make director at an investment bank and you're making between 800,000 and about 1.2 million, you're not making more than a top performing BDO. Both of us, we know top performing BDOs just this past year. 2023 was the hardest year in SBA in recent memory because of rates.
Mm-hmm.
That still produced 60, 70, 80 million, and their take-home pay was 7 figures.
Well, yeah, I guess the cat's out of the bag now, Greg. Great.
I didn't want to, you know.
Hey,
but I mean,
you're
I think
leaving.
it's fair.
You're leaving. You might as well drop a couple bombs, you know, on your way out.
Think about this. I was at a bank, right? And we had a meeting. You know, you have your annual bank meetings, and it's a retreat. The commercial bankers are there and whatnot. And I was the first BDO hired at the shop and had had a great year, right? And I was talking to my direct about why our comp plan is not that great. And I said, I'm getting hit up by all these other people and the comp plan is what it is. And, you know, he got a little frustrated and said, why don't you go talk to the CEO? And I literally put together a spreadsheet. I said, I personally brought you $2.5 million in non-interest fee income based on all of these loans I closed, what they sold at, yet I only made $250,000. I made a tenth. Okay? You know that us as SBA lenders are bringing in the most amount of money to the financial institution. And, you know, he's an older gentleman and he's retired now. He basically laughed and he said, buddy, welcome to banking. This is how it works. And I mean, that was the last time I was at that financial institution. So I definitely think BDOs should be paid what they're paid, if not more.
Really? Because that's fun, 'cause one of my questions was going to be, are BDOs overpaid?
I think they're underpaid. I mean, my comp plan is great, but I think everybody should have that. You know, what I see at the big shops, Wells, B of A's, I don't know why anybody would work there.
Do you remember the draft?
Yes.
I thought it'd be fun if we just do one more draft real quick, and you draft, instead of BDO team, draft like, I'd love to draft 5 players, a BDO, a sales manager, an underwriter, a closer, and a wild card. Who are you gonna go? Let's start with an underwriter. Were there any underwriters that you've worked with in the past that you would want on your all-star team?
There's been a lot. The time when I was at Home Trust, we had a guy named Jonathan Strauss. He was really great. Got a lot of my deals across the finish line.
Why
Tough
was he
guy,
good?
but worked really well. the turnaround, kind of understanding the deal, not looking for a reason to turn a deal down. That's the biggest problem I have with underwriters and credit people in general. You know, like one of the things I found, and I'm not trashing this institution, but when I got to ReadyCap, when you left ReadyCap, it was a very credit run shop, right? Like Ray runs that shop and Omer runs that shop. And they would find a million reasons to turn down a deal. And that's why when COVID happened and all of that, they had a delinquency rate of less than 1%. I know for the waterfall guys, the hedge fund guys, that's great. But I would flip it on its head and, say, does that mean that they denied a bunch of loans that should have been approved? So maybe they had $1 billion in loans, but maybe they should have had $2 billion. Think of the revenue they would have generated if they would have done $2 billion and maybe had a 5% loan loss instead of like a 0.5% loan loss. That's a 10x on your loan loss, but you're doubling your top line revenue.
Mm-hmm.
So those little things, I think that's where, again, I'm going to come back to the sales manager here, who is going to be my next pick, is going to be our buddy Mark Gibson over at First Internet Bank.
Wow.
I think he's created an amazing shop over there. And he built that thing in the air, right? We've had a great relationship, and he has to manage a lot of egos. We know when Alan Peterson's at a shop, that's a lot of ego. So,
I would actually pick Alan for that role. See, you picked an existing sales manager. I was thinking,
yes,
I would pick Alan. Think about Alan as a sales manager with like with 17 young, 25-year-old BDOs like in a room, and Alan's in the front of the room, firing them up.
No, I think that would be great. Alan's good at that. I think though Alan is focused currently on being a BDO himself and perfecting.
It's an imaginary draft, Greg. This isn't real. We don't actually
have
to draft these people. No, I
thought you were saying real people, No,
it's just a fun game. Why don't you keep going? Who's next?
All right. We're picking the BDO next. This is a tough one, man. I know so many great BDOs.
This is a tough one.
The one guy I should probably give a shout out to, he is kind of a steady Eddie, been doing this since the days of Community South. I'm talking late 90s. It's probably the first Indian guy in the game. He was my mentor when I got into it. He works for Danny Preston over at Acclivity. Also a very great BDO manager, sales manager, is Anil James. So Anil lives here in Raleigh, about down the street from me. He did my SBA loan when I was a borrower in 2007. I also brokered him some deals in the very beginning before I became a banker, and really, really enjoy his outlook on being a BDO. He really enjoys it. He's out there to help people. He's been doing it 20 plus years. He's stuck to his role. He's comfortable with his role as a BDO. He does his numbers, anywhere from 15 to 25 every year for the past 20 years. And he's very comfortable with that. He loves spending time with his family and kids and wife, going on vacation. And he is a true example of someone as a BDO that does an extremely great job and is comfortable in his role, doesn't want to be the manager, doesn't want to go run the shop. I think as a pure BDO, I think that is a great person to draft.
I respect that. What about closing? Closing's tough. What makes a good closer?
All right, so I'm gonna rattle the boats here. A lot of people are probably not gonna like this pick. I am going to go with third party closing. We use Windsor Advantage. Just about everywhere I've worked outside of First Internet and ReadyCap, we've used third party closers at all the banks and credit unions I've worked at.
Interesting.
And I really like the guys at Windsor. Sean started Windsor out of his garage in Chicago in like 2010, 2011. It's now owned by Westtown. It's the largest LSP in the country. In terms of loan volume and servicing. I think they have close to like 3 or 4 billion in servicing right now. They work with about 125 to 135 banks. And just like what happened with PPP, they hired a bunch of people to get that through for their member banks.
Mm-hmm.
And they hired some wrong people, and the quality there wasn't great. But I think they've righted the ship. Breckheimer, who currently is president and CEO over there, is a great guy. I know everyone over there from when it originally started. And so the reason why I like it at the end of the day is because if closing is holding things up or not calling your borrower, if I call my closer and start screaming at them to like do their job, internally, that's an HR violation. When it's a third party vendor, I can call them and be like, what are you doing? You need to call this guy, get this, this, and this. They'll do it, because if not, that's their job and that's a bad performance review. And at the end of the day, there are terrible LSPs out there, but Windsor, I would say, is probably the best and number one LSP in the country. So that is my closing team.
Thankfully, we don't have any LSP sponsors on this podcast, or I'd have to cut that whole thing out. And then finally, your wild card. What's a wild card pick? Any person, any position to be on your team.
Let's go with that wild card spot with my buddy Sterling Birdsong over at Bay First Financial. And the reason why I like to pick him is because he's young. We need more young BDOs. We need more young BDOs of color. And that's just feeling a demographic thing. But I will tell you, everywhere I've worked, just about in higher positions, it's all been white men over 50, right? I think that is going to change as the demographics of this country changes. But I really like what Sterling has done over at Bay First with him and Chris Hackney. Zernick has built a great team over there, Tom has. And as we see more minorities in leadership roles, and the reason why I say that is because when you get a better representation of society, my COIs are different than that 50-year-old BDO who has COIs, right? So our loans are going to look completely different. And that's why I think having those younger, more multicultural BDOs brings in a lot of different types of SBA loans. And it gives access to a broader community.
Well, I think that's a great pick. And I think you have a very solid team there. And hey, man, thank you so much for coming on here. And I really wish you nothing but the best in this next chapter of your life. So good luck.
Thank you. And I want to ask you now, I'd like to get, Gala Investments as a sponsor to the next BDO retreat, because a little bit I'm going to do talk about my company, if that's okay, really quickly. So Gala Investments, what our goal here is to do is to syndicate and do what you see in commercial real estate, to residential real estate development. So we're raising multiple funds to build housing units and subdivisions across the southeastern United States. We currently have projects in the Raleigh-Durham market and Charlotte market, but we are aggressively looking at projects in South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. So Jacksonville, Orlando, Tampa, Gainesville in Florida. In Atlanta, we're looking at the northern Atlanta suburbs. And in South Carolina, in Charleston and Greenville, Myrtle Beach as well. So our goal here is to talk to some of the BDOs that have been making, a large amount of money and successful, to give them investment opportunities. And so as we raise our next fund, so I raised $4 million for our first fund last year, which we're breaking ground on. Our new fund this year, we're going to be raising $20 million for our multiple projects in the pipeline. So all of you guys, reach out to me on LinkedIn if you're interested, want to check it all out. And we're going to build this company from the ground up. And I'm super excited for this next journey in my life.
Cool, man.
Thank you for having me on, Ray.
You got it. Thank you for coming on. All right, Greg. Good luck. All right, that's it for this week. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode of the Art of SBA Lending. And if you have any feedback or suggestions, email me at ray@artofsba.com. Until next time, ta-ta.